I understand you've been quite successful.
Well, yes, since 1996, when I first learned about how terrible the situation is, from Filipino-American veterans who became U.S. citizens by virtue of their fighting for America during those terrible years, that they could not be accepted as patients at hospitals. And my dad told me one evening in 1989 that he was told to go away because they said, you might have a discharge paper from the U.S. Army, but they passed the law in '46 that you can't be considered a veteran. And that was very painful to my dad and,
right.
And to about almost 26,000 Filipino Americans, U.S. citizens who fought during World War II.
And he shared this disappointment with you.
He was a quiet man, but I saw it in his eyes. And when it clicked in my mind, I thought he was okay being a U.S. citizen, working gainfully in the United States, in Los Angeles. But when I met some of his comrades and they told me about this hurt, deep feelings of alienation, that they didn't feel that they were Americans.
Right.
That's the whole purpose, the mission of our organization is to make our veterans feel that they're Americans.
Sure. And you've been successful. You've had, I believe, meeting with President Clinton.
Yes.
In what other areas have you been successful? There's been legislation?
Sure. Through a bipartisan, we've gotten support from both Republicans and Democrats. We passed legislation, actually three laws over the past 3 years that allow our veterans special benefits. They're not considered full American veterans yet, but they get partial benefits.
Amazing, huh?
Yes.
What does it take?
Well, it takes an act of Congress to rescind or to amend the laws that they passed in 1946.
Mm-hmm.
My dad's an example, we won a law 2 years ago that allowed Filipino-American veterans who die in this country to be buried in national cemeteries. When they're dead, they're a U.S. veteran. However, when they're still alive, they're excluded from the veterans service facilities. And my dad, unfortunately, a few months ago passed away, and his consolation was that he got full military honors on his, at the funeral. They had a full color guard. They had representatives from the U.S. Air Force, the Navy, and the Army. They had 21 gun salute for my dad, and he got an American flag over his casket. And then has a nice plot now in Riverside, California, the National Cemetery. And that's my dad's consolation.
That must have been quite a moving time for you.
Yes, it was.
On a personal level as well as on an advocacy level.
Right, and it's really unfortunate because my mom passed 2 days ahead of my father, and my dad was in his last stage of cancer, and it came all together, and
wow.
That's what keeps me going in this mission.
Now, I know that your organization has had some support from other groups that have been pretty well established and could really move your agenda forward. Where is some of this support coming from?
We're very fortunate. Our Asian American advocacy groups, from the OCA, from the Asian Pacific Labor Alliance, to the Japanese American Association, JCL, the Japanese American Veterans Association, are supporters of our campaign over the years. Our sponsors in the Senate, especially the leader, Senator Daniel Inouye, who's also a World War II veteran, was one of our long-time supporter, champion. He spearheaded also in the Senate the naturalization of our World War II veterans to get them U.S. citizenship. And in the House, we have Republican supporters, especially Congressman Gilman of New York, who's also a World War II veteran who fought in the Pacific.
So your support is, as you mentioned, coming from both parties.
Exactly.
In fact, that's the only way you can move this kind of legislation.
That's right.
Where is your opposition coming from? Quite obviously, there must be people opposed to this. What is the rationale, if you have that?
It comes from two sectors. First of all, the folks who are concerned about the cost, the Office of the Management and Budget, the Congressional Budget Office, and uninformed individuals who don't know the sacrifices of our Filipino World War II veterans who sacrificed a lot. I was telling some students, journalism students, that in the Philippines was the first battleground of America. More than 16,000 U.S. troops died there. But compared to the Filipino, casualties, there's almost including civilians who were caught in the crossfire, almost 1 million, according to some historians, who passed away during World War II. Wow. So it dramatizes to you the sacrifices that Filipino soldiers who fought in Bataan and Corregidor. The Bataan Death March, you saw the movie by John Wayne,
Yeah.
Back to Bataan. Anthony Quinn played the Filipino guerrilla leader who saves the life of John Wayne. It dramatizes that the Filipino people, the Filipino soldiers, paid a big price for fighting for America.
So if you had something to say to this opposition, anybody who would say, well, that's the way it is, basically you'd say they deserve it, right?
Right.
Just like anyone else who has put in their time and fought on behalf of this country.
Right.
I know that you've been an activist your whole life, and you were part of the anti-Marcos movement,
Yes.
right? So tell us about that period in your life.
Yes, I was in college at University of Southern California, and I grew up in the Philippines. That time, I'm bicultural in many ways. And President Marcos was our graduation speaker, and I was telling our friends that that half of the graduating class walked out when he gave the graduation speech. Unfortunately, at the time, President Marcos threw his support behind President Lyndon Johnson in the war in Vietnam, and it created a big opposition. And